Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings Here, wherever, and everywhere. Here and everywhere. It's the same rules apply everywhere. This world's one place. It's not made of a bunch of indifferent stuff or different stuff. In a lot of ways, all this stuff is the same. You can categorize the stuff as a form of stuff and describe it in generalities, because the generalities are the only thing that are important. Like generalities, like feeling. Thinking, sort of a specialized little thing that happens mostly. Well, can't even really say that, right? You say, well, it's mostly humans, but most humans don't think very well, right? They don't have very good thoughts going through their head because they haven't been nurtured to think well. So I was thinking about people, and I've been doing a bit of reading and watching of old Darwin related things. So the turtle. Anyway, not a tortoise, but it's a turtle. Anyway, and part of me is, you get caught up in just the culture of it and thinking about just the physics of Darwin, in the sense of going out in little boats and sailing around the world, and what would you just can't imagine how dismal it's got to be as a project, especially the cold climates, being no electricity, just got to be just dismal. Way to survive it even. So even the sturdiness of people is sort of remarkable when you think about it. And the reason, the will to do such things, just the danger of it, the overt, risks you're taking, and not to be in any way, no impediment somehow. And then, the whole structure being built out of this whole religious context where everywhere you go, you have to placate the rituals of godliness as if we have some common theme. And there's just so many elements to, the process. And but anyways, and just the fact that people were so articulate, and they spoke in a very reasoned way. These scientist types anyway, and yet they were watching and whatever, viewing, analyzing, discovering, okay, things that just, the barbarism is just so brutal and harsh, and not that they accepted it, but they accepted it to the extent that they said this is the way of things, and walked through it. During Darwin's visit to South America, for example, they were very busy at annihilating all the Native Americans in South America, the Spaniards and the related to Spaniards, I guess, the inbreds, and it was all pretty much a Holocaust. And this in the context of viewing the nature of things, and watching animals, the carnage, and when you read some of what Darwin wrote contemporaneous to his travels, and then his later writings get more and more a little darker, a little greater appreciation for the horror. In some ways, there was one example of the wasp that capture spiders and then lay their eggs on the immobilized but still alive spider, and let the little maggots eat it to death. And there was description, like, this is a marvelous and miraculous and you know, it's just an incredible thing, and it's just like, what a, you know, they just feel almost like they're privileged to witness it, which is just seemed quite funny. And you know, I actually saw one of these wasps do this thing. I spent a day, pretty much, well, it took 4 hours or whatever, for the whole process of, you know, killing the spider, and then it dragged it 40 or 50 feet away, to hide it up in a chimney. And you know, I think I have a video, one of my amendum videos, where, you know, I have clips of all that. And yeah, it's just this. You're just watching this and saying, "This is life on Earth." I mean, it's disgusting. I mean, it's just disgusting. So you can look at this turtle, right there. I'm gonna point the right way, and he's had thousands of brothers and sisters, thousands of them, and most all of them have been killed brutally. For him to reach this size and mass, he's made out of thousands of dead turtles. And I think if he knew that, if he knew the cost of his roaming about in the muck, you know, eking out an existence, you know, trying to find something to eat and trying to avoid the sharks and, you know, just getting by, that he wouldn't be too impressed by this arrangement, you know, and he wouldn't be saying, "Oh yes, I'm worth it. I'm doing something totally miraculous and fantastic, and it's certainly worth killing a few just like me, you know, when they're children, for this miraculous event of me roaming about with parasites drilling holes in me and being chased by sharks and blah blah blah. Yeah, it's well worth it." No, I don't think so. I don't think a reasonable person could draw these conclusions. So anyway, the Darwin thing is a tricky one for me, because you see the intelligence in the man, and you see he's drawing this conclusion that there is no God. I mean, it's just a rubbish, stupid, silly story. And the truth of our existence is this long history of, you know, animals just beating the crap out of each other, and, you know, this battle for survival. And you know, he has some appreciation for that, I guess, in some of his early writings, but very little, frankly, compared to the Origin of Species. It was sort of my impression that he wrote the Voyage of the Beagle, you know, after, you know, like that was a later book, and then I realized, no, that was the first book. You know, but anyway, you know, so you're just saying, I bet Darwin, if you could, you know, interview him in his old age, be a much more cautious in his greatest show on earth kind of rhetoric. Same thing for Dawkins. You wonder about the character of the man, you know, in the sense of knowing what it is, and knowing how Borgish it is, in the sense that how so many animals are just trapped in a syndrome of, this is what I am and this is what I do, and that's it. They don't even have the option of having some of these thoughts flow into their imagination, giving them some inkling, you know, that they can choose to be an asshole, or they can choose to be something else, like some options are available. Now, our options aren't really available because they're all dependent on what has influenced us. Clearly, I've been substantially influenced by people like Darwin and Carl Sagan, you could even say, to some extent. The different people who produced different storytelling about different characters of history, even having the wrong history makes you into somebody. You get the right history and you turn into somebody else. I mean, as a kid, I had some notion that America was formed out of some true sense of freedom and liberty. You know, like there was some real grievance, that the king was some horrible oppressor. And you find out now it's really just about people not wanting to pay the owner. You know, they just figured they could steal the country, and that's all they did. They said, we can steal it. I mean, can't afford to send an army over here to stop us, so let's just steal the place. You know, just a lot of greed and self-interest, and, you know, all these high ideals are, you know, the reality is that they're not so high. There's a lot of what's in it for me in it, and a lot of what's in it for us versus them's. And, so you gain some perspective. So anyway, I don't know exactly how to tie all this together. I want to say something about the consent argument, but not as a direct response to certain dunces, superhuman duncers. But anyway, but the real point I wanted to get to is just this idea that we're here. We're here, and we can understand that a lot of what we do is just reflexive because we're reflexive organisms, and then we have this thing that happens to us. We get conditioned by our maturation, and it makes us afraid of certain things, and it makes us attracted to certain things, very narrow kind of ways that we're manipulated by our biology to say that's hot and that's not. Our taste in food, our taste in music, taste in a lot of things is kind of irrationally just imposed on us by certain stupid little events that happen in our life that make us insecure or secure or confident or not confident, aggressive or passive in our, introverted, extroverted. Lots of this stuff is dictated, and it kind of puts us in a little bit of a cage. And then, the cage isn't, the bars are open enough where we can still see our way to better things. It just makes navigating more difficult because you, almost like the turtle, you're carrying a limitation of your conditioning. You've got to drag it around with you. Your comfort. And from that perspective, through your little bars and through your limitations, you have to see what the real right and wrongs are in the real world and decide what you're going to be. In that sense, we make a decision. But again, the decision is already made for us, by the information we have to calculate it, by the facts that we can glean from the world. And the real question is how careful you select your facts. How careful are you in defining what's possible or impossible and what's reasonable or rational, what it adds up to. And that really just has to do with whether you're saying something's a real thing or a no thing. I mean, does religion have any value as a theory? I mean, does it have any plausibility? Isn't any kind of made-up silly story just as good as that fable? I mean, what shall I believe in talking fish? Should I believe in, thinking animals and walking bears and, eating porridge and all that kind of stuff because somebody makes up the story? I should fall for it. It's that bad, and you're saying if people are letting that influence their judgment, some notion that there's a spiritual being of some kind out in the sky or out in whatever, the ether, making some sort of decisions, based on his infinite knowledge of everything because he's been around forever playing with things on planets or something. I don't know what his life experience is. Is he really competent to play this piano? The story doesn't provide any depth of reasoning, anything to make it understandable. And it just all comes down to basically, I promise, believe in me and I'll give you a nice party in heaven. And, that's all that really is bribery. Believe or I'll torture you. I'll punish you if you don't believe and I'll reward you if you do. So they just sell it like it's, and you're saying if people fall for that, if it's not true, it's a substantially different universe, right? Because then we have to deal with the facts of what the game is, this natural selection. This competition for survival, this competition, period, for the purpose of, maintaining the existence of a DNA molecule, its perpetuation into the future. So, so my argument is you just land here on Earth, you're here. And what it can occur to you is, regardless of those facts, even though I think those facts are really important to understand correctly, whether there is a God or there isn't a God, it's a big one. You got to get right to do any really good logic. And then even the people who got it right, like I'm pointing out, like the Darwins of the world, seem kind of glib and irrational in their perception of the spectacle. They're going to the bullfight and somehow just playing along like, oh yeah, this makes perfectly good sense. We're going to harass and torture a bull so some guy can feel like his nuts are bigger. Yeah, so yeah, that's what we're really going to do that. And they just play along and say this is somehow good sport and big fun. And it's, on its face, it's horrid. It's stupid. It's so silly. And, Darwin's a smart guy. I mean, how come he ain't getting it? Dawkins is a smart guy. How come he ain't getting it? And it's not like they haven't been exposed to these arguments. I mean, they understand. They're carving their meat dinner, made out of something's existence that they decided just wasn't necessary. I mean, it just doesn't need to be. Doesn't need to continue like I do. Somehow I need to continue. It doesn't need to continue. And how they rationalize these distinctions of making these judgments. So I mean, I'm just saying, if you understand the nature of what's going on, you can't make those distinctions. Those are like making distinctions between your family, like they're really important people, and those people aren't important. It's like that turtle saying, well, the other turtles, the eggs laid by the other turtle somehow aren't real turtles. They're not as turtley as I am. I'm much more turtley than they are. And, it's just be irrational if that was what the little turtle was thinking. You'd say, that's pretty silly, turtle. I mean, these distinctions, what you're saying you're good for, isn't what you have a prettier little sparkle on one of your fins or something. You have an extra long toenail, or what? What makes you so much better? It's not rational. It's and so you think in the context of somebody as articulate and thoughtful in many ways about thinking about the implications of organisms and how did they get here, and contemplating the environment that would make it conducive for them to be in this location at this time, and what kind of mechanism could possibly explain the different tortoise shells on the different Galapagos Islands, and if you're capable of contemplating that, why aren't you capable of contemplating the fact that all of these other sentient mammals are doing the same thing you're doing, except they're not doing math. They're not. They're the extent of their map they can read is not as high, so they don't know the languages and they don't know. It's just playing some game like smartness gives you more integrity as a feeling organism, or as something whose welfare needs to be protected, and it's kind of a irrational perception, I would argue, kind of clearly. And it's kind of clear that Darwin knew that to some extent. He knew the black race wasn't, some nothing. He knew that on the very boat he was on, they had captured a couple of in a previous voyage, captured a couple of Tawero, the place in the bottom of South America. Captured some Indians, a couple, and sent them to England, educated them for 4 years, and then they came back to be missionaries, essentially, to the natives. So Darwin knew that, yes, it was just education that made these people primitive, that the only difference between a civilized, well-dressed man is just the expense of the civilization and education and some clothes. That's it. These are just behaviors, and they can be learned. And but there wasn't anything in substance that was any less valuable as a person. Anyway, getting back to the theme. So it's just this idea that we're here, and then we have at our disposal information, information provided by other people. You know, the writings of Darwin and the writings of whoever you're inclined to think was a good writer, or said something in illustrating or providing you some information that gave you a truth that was something that stuck in your head. And then you're going to take these facts you have and attempt to figure out what's the plan. You know, what do I do with my existence? Because in a sense, I can figure out that here I am in a position where there are plenty of victims to be saved. It's like I'm watching the rape and the pillage. And how much do I impose by doing nothing, or do I impose by doing something? And no matter what I do, it's going to be an imposition, and it's going to be an imposition in the context of some uncertainty, not about what the right thing to do is in the sense of what the right thing to stop or prevent is, but in understanding whether I can productively do that, whether what I'm going to do will help the cause or hurt the cause. And that's where the complexity is. The complexity is in understanding what cause there is to fight for, which is eliminate harm. The problem is figuring out what's the most effective way to accomplish the goal, to even do something productive in terms of a measure of help, because good intentions can be the road to hell. Providing band-aids in a circumstance where the person you heal will do no good with their healing. They will just make more problems. It's, again, feeding the starving, feeding people who have overdone and not regulated their conduct to provide for a world that's sustainable. And so they starve, and then you feed them, and what will they make is they'll make more desert, and they'll make more starvation in the future. So your good intentions won't create any positive outcome, because what needs to be fixed isn't their starvation, it's the things that caused their starvation. So that sort of gets a little bit to the point of recognizing that people can have good intentions or a very humanistic will, but they can be so lost in their delusions of silver linings and that somehow the reward is in the act and not the motivation. And good intentions is all you need, and you don't. You need more than that. You need a rational plan. You need some theory where those good intentions can produce the outcome that you're claiming to care about. All right, so back to this idea of the decision for your own life. What do you do? How do you? What's the thought process of your imposition, of your having to exercise your will? And your will might mean that you do have to do something where the starving people must starve, or something that seems quite brutal, quite evidence of someone not caring rather than somebody caring. I guess I could relate this to the argument I've made about feral cats, and how I believe it'd be so much more humane to, instead of putting them to sleep, to cut their nuts off, to manipulate their sex organs. That would just be better to put them to sleep permanently. That it's much more of it's a much more caring, productive act, simply put, than to spend extra to keep them alive and preserve some notion that you've done them some good service, when you haven't provided for them. You've just put them back into a hell, and you've done so with some plan, you know, that in the end that will somehow accomplish the task, when it's cost way too much money, and the money you wasted on that preserve their life as if you're doing them a favor notion, and it is just a notion. I don't think it can be demonstrated by a proof that you've done them any favor. It's like saving people from, you know, their first fatal disease, you know, and thinking, well, you've accomplished something. You know, you cured their cancer so they can get it again in, you know, 3 years, and go through the whole crap again. And, you know, you're not really doing anybody a favor to perpetuate their falling down the cliff, you know, to keep bandaging them after each rock hit, and then just let them keep hitting rocks. It's not logical. Doesn't, you know, facts don't compel us to do stupid things like that. Some notion of what superficially looks like love, and it's not really love. It's sort of like the mercy killing argument, right? I mean, it's an unpleasant thing to do, but the fact that it is truly, if you really love me, you'll kill me kind of thing, isn't a lie. Okay, it's not a deception. You're doing somebody this genuine good of suspending, you know, preventing further harm. And, you know, it's not something that's should be of some intense debate among people. That's just a simple fact. That you're not, by perpetuating people's death, you're not doing them any favors by obliging them to be courageous and keep fighting the good fight, and all this rhetoric and all this bullshit about you're not going to be a hero if you let yourself die. You know, don't go into that good night or whatever, that idiotic poem. You know, well, you know, don't go through the door until they push you through it. You know, why? I mean, why shouldn't I just walk through it with some dignity? Do I really have to be beaten to a pulp and then shoved through it in little pieces? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So anyway, so really you're just looking for authorization. You're looking for some decisive bit of evidence to tell you I'm doing the right thing. And, you know, we're sort of stuck here to saying that, you know, the evidence is difficult. And I guess I would partly argue not because of the evidence being hard to see. It's just not compatible with the conditioning. We've been conditioned to be winners, to fight, to you know, give in, not be a pussy, not be a sissy, not be a wimp, not to, you know, and so there's all this these cheering fans who are really forcing the gladiators to kill each other. They just keep pumping them up and saying fight, 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 fight. And you know, the gladiators know it's something fundamentally wrong. This isn't what I want to be doing with my existence. And yet they're just stuck being pushed into the psychology of this is what winning is. This is what being a good player is playing your part in the spectacle. And it's clearly not a productive or decent way to live. So anyway, so I guess I'm arguing the facts aren't complicated. The sea turtle isn't complicated. The world, the mechanical devices fighting, eking out their existence. The story of evolution isn't complicated. And it's the gross waste of it isn't obscure. So in that sense, in the sense of knowing I'm against it, okay, being able to say, no, don't make more of that. Don't do more of that. It's not a good idea to kill thousands of sea turtles to make a sea turtle. It's just not rational. You can't do that. It's stupid. And you just vote for it. That's stupid. You just claim that. And that's easy to do. Don't have to do some you know, you don't have to actively be involved in the process. You can just vote against it with your, you know, your words. And so we all can do that. Should be able to do that, that minimum, in defense of the victims that will be created by the perpetuation. You could at least say, it's like me voting in an election where, you know, I can't vote. You know, I could say it's, don't vote for them Tory guys in England or something. You know, I could say something, you know, just remind people that they're all, you know, dirty, rotten scoundrels, and you don't want to give them power and blah, blah, blah. I don't have to be a participant to have an opinion and to express the opinion and hope the opinion means something to other people who care about facts and, you know, what the outcome's going to be and what you're voting for, really. You know, what the real imposition is going to be. Alright, it's probably a little left of where I want to go. So, it's, again, the imposition argument is really just an argument about having authority, having, you know, meeting the minimum standards of what something should be before it acts. Doing enough thinking gives you some credibility to reading up on the subject. You know, you know, there's food that are poisonous, like the Japanese eat blowfish, and you know it's poisonous fish, but if you prepare it just right, it's edible. And it's like you're just saying that, well, somebody who's going to impose this food, create this food, should have some competence. Just, you know, so he should know the difference between the poison and the not poison, and shouldn't pretend to be competent when he's not. You know, that's sort of your obligation, is to have some sort of knowledge of the fact that you know what you're doing. You really do know. You know, not that you're retarded or autistic and you're just saying, I'm a very good driver because you're an idiot, but that you actually have reason to say, you know, I can play this life game and I can make these decisions for, you know, these outcomes, these decisions to have kids, for example. This incredibly weighty decision that people take so trivially, you know, and that you're competent to do this imposing, to do this, to take this step of saying, I'm guaranteeing, I'm putting my seal of approval on the idea of it, you know, because I have some competence and I know that it's all going to turn out okay. And it was well worth it. And I know it for some rational reasons. Like I can write a book about what a great idea it is. You know, it's a great victory somehow. And that the losers, the thousands of dead tortoises, really don't mean anything, turtles. They were all jerks or idiots or assholes, and they deserved what they got. And so this is all good. There's no harm, no foul. Yeah. Anyway, so the point is I have made arguments about this idea that consent is always a great thing to get from these things that are going to be jeopardized. The things that are going to be put on the tightrope should consent to, yes, I want to play tightrope. Tightrope is fun. It's purposeful, it's productive, it's a great idea. You know, let's walk on a little rope over a bunch of swords, you know, because there's a cupcake on the other side. You know, why did the human cross the tightrope? I'm sure he did it for some trivially stupid reason, you know, because he thought everything was going to be okay. That he thought happily ever after was over there, you know, because of these silly stories he was fed as a baby. So the consent argument is really just an argument about authority, the authority to make a decision, the authority of having reason to have a conclusion, and in a sense, consent. Somebody's saying, it's okay, give me your best, use your best judgment, it's okay. I accept your judgment, I accept you've done enough thinking and you're competent. I've accepted your credentials, it's okay to play with my existence. It'd be a great thing to have, because it exempts you from blame for making the wrong decision. It exempts you from your failure, an accident, fucking up. And so it's sort of necessary when you're going to do something that's going to put something else at jeopardy. That's going to put the whole planet at jeopardy, in a sense. You know, your kid could be Hitler, could be some you know, demon. Um, and you're saying I'm making this decision with no real knowledge of what I've made possible or made impossible, without any consent of all the players who are now going to be annihilated, because your cheating spawn will go into the earth and make a mess. So anyway, it's just a great thing to have, consent. Consent gives you authority, where absolute knowledge certainly gives you authority. If you're godlike and that you've acquired all the information and you can be quite confident that you've assessed the positive and negative potentialities and made a good judgment, you can be confident and you can do your imposing because it's the right thing to do. And you're sure you've got the right answer. Well, if you're sure, that's a substantial thing. It doesn't come from nowhere in most cases. So that can be respected. But again, consent makes it easy, makes the authority question, it just eliminates, it is a problem. And what should stifle human beings in their behavior, the consent argument should be significant to them in understanding they can't get it. They can't get the consent of the thing they're going to play with. And so now their authority has to come from their own competence. It has to come from them saying, I'm smart enough, and I'm capable enough, and I know I'm going to live, and I know I'm going to be strong, and I know I'm going to do the right things, and I know I'm not going to fuck it up. And they can't do any of that. So they have to just make up some sort of fake authority that somehow they have the right to impose when they don't have any of the features that would give them that right. And the easiest feature to get is consent, but they can't get it. And the hard feature to get is real experience and real knowledge, and that would give them the right to create this meal out of these potentially poisonous ingredients. Yeah, time for a break. Yeah, I should be back. Probably. So, I guess I'll do this, whatever, promotion thing of the Ephelist channel, just to emphasize the reason for the conversation is this recognition of how serious it is, this idea of making living things. And the idea of asserting that it's worth it. So whenever an individual is saying, I'm going to have children, what are they really saying is, I want my children to defeat the other children, be the dominant, win the competition. So somebody else's kids can lose and fail. Come in second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth and all that other stuff. And attempting to make the winner, you're really saying, I want to make somebody else a loser, because that's exactly what you're going to do. You're the influence, the effect of you existing is that somebody else likely has less chance of existing, because you're going to be consuming resources and taking jobs and taking wives and doing all kinds of things that somebody else would be doing. And the point is your spawn going to do it better than that other winner? Is he going to be a better winner than the other winner would have been? Is he going to is he going to really earn it in all the ways you can describe earning it, in the sense of being truly better? It's better that they won than that guy won, or that guy won, or that guy won. The world's a better place because of that victory. And you can sort of make a political analogy or something, like, is the world a better place? And, have what politicians have done more damage than good, and all of that kind of stuff, which ones squandered the opportunities, and blah, 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 blah. But there's a truth to it. There's a fact that in each one of these contexts, we're assuming that somehow the right guy wins, and it's not the way it works. And so that's another thing Darwin kind of knew, that intrinsically this struggle for survival, the rules can be completely almost you almost can't find the element of integrity in them, in the sense that anything will do, any cheat, any way of manufacturing a victory is a victory, and so much of the brutality. And he could certainly see it in the contests between human beings, that it wasn't the merit of a man, it was his position, the position of his family, his origin, that all of that decided his fate. There was no earned establishment. And, he was such the benefit of such a system of privilege, and he seemed to have little humility about that privilege, took little opportunity to be grateful. And that sort of contrasts with Wallace. Wallace was a guy who came a bit after Darwin, in terms of he was a completely self-made naturalist. He didn't have Cambridge education and all of that. And he was sort of had to do it as a job, in the sense that it was a way of making a living, was going around the world and collecting butterflies and whatnot to sell to the fancies as ornaments and whatnot. And he arrived at the theory 20 or 30 years later than Darwin had already arrived at a conclusion, and Darwin just spent 20 years deciding how to present the argument to the world, and to evade what he was inhibited by, which was the social implications. Probably feared that he would have to be a common man again or something, because he was going to say something to offend the aristocracy and the whole thing, because the implications of everything he's saying is very anti the people who think their privilege was earned. In a sense, I mean, it does come down to that. It's a logical conclusion, is to recognize that what has the competition among men been? Has it been a fair contest has it measured men as individuals, or has it measured them by silly advantage? And that's it. And heritage. So once you have the tools, the tanks, the structure, you just impose your authority. Kind of like the Spaniards, in the sense that, when the Spaniards arrive in South America, 100 of them, they kill 1,000, one battle, without sustaining any deaths on their side. Those kinds of, contests between people, grotesquely unwell matched, no Queensberry rules of requiring the contest to be a real contest. Force the guy to play baseball with a wiffle ball bat, and no glove, and just complete huge gigantic disadvantages, and say play as good a game. Makes no sense. There's just no integrity in any kind of statement that the people who are here because our ancestors were all such wonderful, fair fighters. They didn't run from the plague, and they didn't avoid all the disasters by scheming and conniving. And of course they must have. And it's just the truth. And so there's nothing inherent about us and our real heritage, the real history of the games being played. The turtle, he might have been a terrible cheater to win. He might have kicked sand in his brother's face as they were leaving the beach, as they were racing to the water. Just saying. I mean, obviously, in nature, the contest is between a lot of usually equally equipped organisms and blah, blah, blah. And you could say the winner did earn it in the sense that he had some silly advantage, a mutation that gave him advantage. And for that mutation, there was 1,000 mutations that made the other animals disabled. And he just happened to get the lucky mutation that gave him, a sharper bite or some other thing, a better eye or whatever. And that's all it is. And, it wasn't earned. He just hatched with it. So, it's not a good story, what the game we're playing. So again, I can make the argument to somebody, it's a serious thing you're doing when you're going to have kids. You're changing the earth, and you're affecting all kinds of, you're going to influence lots of dynamics that are going to take place in the future. And you're doing it blind. And how can you make a rational statement that that's a great idea, is to just blindly interfere in destinies, and that it's more important that you do something to create a world where we're not so blind, where we know what the outcomes are going to be, and we know the fights that are going to happen are going to be nice, fair fights, and that we all had consent to be fighters. And that only people who wish to be gladiators are gladiators. We just don't throw the helmet and the sword in the guy's hand and say, that's what you are, when he had no will to be. But this goes this bit deeper into the only thing your choice is going to be made out of, your decision, is a bunch of noise you've heard from the world about what being alive really is, what it signifies. I mean, if you really think you're satisfying some purpose, some engineered purpose, you don't really understand that the function is just kill or be killed. And that's really all that's taking place. You're just machines trying to preserve your plug is in the socket, and you got your lights on, and you're just trying to keep it that way. And you'll do almost anything to keep it that way. And not for good rational reasons, but for completely subjective personal reasons, where you have a clear association between being unplugged and being broken. And not necessarily the same thing, not really the same thing at all. But it somehow looks the same. We have a sense that it's the same. And being unplugged and broken aren't the same. Being unplugged and failing aren't the same. Not being plugged in the first place is not losing. You didn't lose because you were never plugged in. Lots of ways to analogize it. All you're really attempting to emphasize, all I'm attempting to emphasize is it's, I would hope it would occur to you on your own how significant it is to be playing a game for which you can't really know the outcomes. To just do it because you have some notion of doing. That you should have given it some thought if you haven't. I guess that's part of it. I guess that's part of the conversation, is there are so many people who have never really engaged in any process of balancing their wishes and hopes and aspirations against what the real consequence is of you winning. You winning the competition means what changes in the world. Again, are you going to be a winner who makes it better for the rest of the players, or are you going to be a winner who's going to make it a lot worse, ruin the game? And once you consider that for your own existence in terms of what you're doing just to get by, this extra step, this gigantic leap of saying, I could argue the whole vegetarian argument. I mean, even even the most aggressive defender must have some concern in the back of their head that what if I'm wrong? What if their suffering does matter? And what am I really contributing to? What am I making happen in the world? It must occur to them a little bit to have some thought that runs through their head saying, well, let's be fair to the argument. What if I'm wrong? What if it does matter? And if they can't do it with their own, with those simple things, and then they get to this choice of making children, they really think they should do it just because everybody else does, because that's what they're here for? Because a DNA molecule has a plan for them, when we know what its plan is, and we know that that's our own history. I mean, women had more than 10 kids. That's, women often did that, and half of them or more died, and that was their life. You wish that on somebody? You think that's a great mechanism? I mean, it's so I mean, just again, it's hard to imagine how people could be so fooled, especially in the past. Like I said, how the Darwins of the world could not be more panicked about the predicament we're in. Less relaxed and comfortable with just talking about it like it's a scientific experiment and it doesn't have anything to do with us. Like it has nothing to do with your place in the world and your obligation to protect, to prevent all of this harm that's just sitting there waiting to happen. But that's just part of the psychology, I suppose, that's more powerful than the philosophy. The thinking mind is still a slave to the ape and the lizard. These conditioned behaviors, these conditioned notions of what it is to be a winner and how to have integrity and how to appear worthy of statuesque, worthy of somebody building a memorial to you. What are the antics and the particular behaviors that earn you this privilege? And it seems that's all he was caught up in. And this science thing was just like a game of chess, strategy. How do I figure out how nature is manipulating this board game? And it's just dissecting, a device to figure out how it works, and without understanding we're part of the works. I mean, the fact that he had figured out that we're part of the works should have gave him some perspective in terms of having some will to point out just how awful that is. This is how brutal this all is, and for what? So we can make little flags and put them on our sticks and wear our little starch collars and pretensively wobble about. I mean, it's pathetic to think that somebody so intelligent wouldn't take that step further to understand how beyond our physical body evolving, our understanding evolves, and with that evolution is this understanding that the fables aren't good enough. Those silly stories about happily ever after is baby talk, and our real obligation here is to do something constructive in terms of preventing this imprisonment of thousands of organisms to be just ground up, without any hope of even having a moment where they might sit in their sea and say, oh, what a lovely day. They don't even get that. They just get a brutal struggle, and then they get to be eaten by maggots while still alive. So that's probably enough of a statement for the day. So there's more I wanted to get to, and like I said, in terms of the real the real contest here is to try to defeat jargon and notions, just these notions people have of, well, they all say it's a good game, they all say it's worth watching, and it's this whole emperor's no clothes kind of crap where you're just fighting against this you know, this horde of idiotic fans cheering, and you need to understand they're not worth it. The fans aren't, they don't have the judgment to decide what's good and bad, and that you as a person, an individual, you know, has to step beyond all of the bullshit and all of the history and all of your ancestry and all of your heritage and all of your whatever it is that you're clinging to as something to be prideful in, and just recognize what is this maze and what is it producing except death, and most of it, a lot of it, insanely, wastefully, brutally horrible, unnecessarily long and brutal, and that there's just absolutely nothing to be gained for this festival. The bullfight doesn't end with, you know, some kind of giant cupcake. You know, there isn't something produced out of it that has any value at all. There's just the spectacle, and the fact that morons feed off of it somehow. You know, that people who have no perspective and no understanding of the context, they haven't acquired any, you know, the humbling knowledge that, you know, this is, some, you know, it is funny that, you know, the religious people have these stupid, you know, there for the grace of God go I. They say these things as if they have some understanding of them, and yet they don't seem to have any understanding of them all. That you're just lucky, and that's it. Every grace you have, every immunity you've been provided from certain horror is just lucky. And you have an obligation to recognize that and appreciate how the unlucky are paying for it. And that's not a good deal. That's rude. That's slavery. And making kids is making slaves. Yes, that's another way of saying it, overtly. I don't think it'd be challenged in any way. You're making them a slave to your genetics and your heritage and your competence and your history and your fables and your nonsense, that you're going to attempt to inject it with all of those, the cancers of your ignorance. Very rude. All right, I'll leave it at that, and such. Not, you know, could have said it better. I mean, I really want to get the robot thing in there. You know, like, again, this conversation isn't a conversation sort of between individuals. It's just a conversation between arguments. Arguments that sit here right in front of me. You look obvious and quite substantial, versus the counter arguments of, I don't want to die, or, you know, and like I'm even threatening them with that, like somehow not having kids is dying, which doesn't even make any sense. I mean, a little bit of perspective. I mean, just the knowledge that, you know, people completely change their behavior based on when they make decisions to have children, you know, and that destinies completely change based on just waiting 2 years. You know, those little tiny things can make huge differences in how people approach these things. And the fact is that most people are born to people way too young to be making the decision. It's just a fact. You pro-lifers can't admit that ignorance shouldn't be guiding this decision, because they do nothing to stop it. They do nothing to discourage beyond saying, you know, premature birthing is bad, okay? That's the best they do. I mean, they don't do anything to assert any reward and punishment, or do anything to um, create different outcomes. They just almost feed the very problem by keeping people ignorant and stupid, and that's what makes the decision. Ignorance and stupid makes dysfunctional families, and dysfunctional family planning. And they don't do anything to tell ignorant and stupid that they can't do that. So anyway, whatever. Till the next time. And yeah, it's like I said, I wanted to get somewhere. I didn't quite get there, so it'll have to do. So I'm just not quite satisfied. But anyway. But spare all his brothers and sisters from perpetual horror. Just waking up to be stomped again, and wake up to be stomped again. Stop it. Until the next time, and such.